And I was like, wait, I literally did my job. I won with everybody that I talked to. Everybody was on my side. And then I didn't get the deal.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Today we have a special guest, Toby Christensen. He's a multifaceted individual with a diverse background. He is a area business manager with Sanofi in rare hematology, and that's where I met Toby. But his background before that, he's had garnered accolades in medical sales. He's worked for companies as prestigious as Novartis and also Stryker and Endoscopy. He was a sideline reporter. Many remember him as a football star at BYU. Got great grades too, earned his master's degree there. And, he's the son of the legendary Todd Christensen. Toby, it's great to have you on the podcast.
No, I appreciate you having me. Thanks for setting this up. And wouldn't exactly call myself a star at BYU, but I enjoyed playing there, so that was fun.
Well, you earned some awards, and you got good grades. I saw that you're, I guess, all conference academic, and you have had an extraordinary career. But maybe you could tell us. There's a lot of, I played a little bit of sports. At Oak Hill and Liberty, and I meet former athletes who, once they're done with college, they make a transition. Maybe you could back up a little bit and just tell us, how did you get into medical sales?
It's interesting because it's not like a great story. I mean, it's pretty funny. I didn't really have a plan B. Because my father played in the NFL, I thought it was easier than it actually was to get to that level. And that was my goal. But being a 5'11" white guy, it turns out there's not a huge market for guys like us in the NFL. And that dream was cut short, shortly after my, college playing career. I got invited to mini camp with the Houston Texans, lasted 3 days, and they didn't invite me back. And I realized, shoot, I need to get a job. Luckily, I guess you could say my plan B was all along. I was getting good grades. I was making sure I was, getting my degree. I got an advanced degree while I was playing at BYU. So I was set that way, but I really didn't have this is what I'm going to do with my life if football doesn't work out. And there was a couple of people, and you get this in college sometimes. If you're a former athlete, there's people that know who you are, that, and then there was a couple of people that had reached out to me with jobs after I was done with college. And at the time I said, give me a minute, let me see if this NFL thing works out. And obviously it didn't. And I hurried and took the first job that was offered to me, and it was in retail sales with a startup company that was started by a couple of ex-BYU football guys. And the company wasn't, like a lot of startup companies, it didn't go very far. And after working with them for 2 years, the company went bankrupt, and I was left there with, at that time now I was married and had a kid, and my company just folded. And I was like, oh no, I need a real job. And someone told us there was a pharmaceutical sales opportunity in my neighborhood, and I should go interview for it. And at the time, I didn't really know a lot about medical sales, but I just come from retail sales. I felt like, I could do it. I felt like I'd be a good fit. It was a good starting role, and I went and interviewed, and long story short, I got the job, and it was with Inventive Health. It was a contract job with Novartis. So I felt like I was working for Novartis. My tag said Novartis, but I was technically with Inventive Health on a contract role that Novartis, hired out, I guess. So, and that's how I got in. It's not a great story. I can't tell you that when I was in third grade and the teacher asked me to stand in front of the class and said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, "I want to be a medical salesman." That didn't happen. But now you know the real story.
No, that's great. And you got in. I think for a lot of our listeners, a couple of things stand out. One is you had, even though the startup with sales was failure, you had some sales experience. You could leverage that, and you also, did contract, and I think that's a good pathway for a lot of people to keep in mind, that sometimes you're successful in contract and it's going to turn into something full time. Do you happen to remember the interview process at all, what that looked like for that very first job?
I don't remember the whole process, but I do remember the two managers that were interviewing me. And I was pretty confident in my ability to do interviews and to sell myself, but I remembered that it felt tougher than I remembered.
Huh.
Because in my mind, obviously I'm confident. Here I am, a former athlete, and I think, yeah, I'm a good catch for you guys. I didn't get that vibe from them. From them, I was getting the vibe like, hey, you're one of a dozen people we're interviewing today. You better show us something. And there was two people I interviewed with. I remember they're both female. I don't remember their names. One was older and she represented Inventive, and the other one was a little younger and she represented Novartis. It was an interesting fit, and I had to do well with both of them, and that's all I remember. But like you said earlier, I mean, it was a nice route to go because I got in with the contract, and a year later, when they got rid of the contract, about 75% of those people were gone. But I was able to roll over into Novartis officially after the contract was cut a year later. So, and I made up that number 75%. It could have been more or less. I don't remember for sure. I just remember
You said it confidently, So, and that's good. Now, you also, after that, you spent some time as a kind of like a sideline reporter, didn't you? Didn't you?
Yeah, that was. I mean, I put that on my LinkedIn, and sometimes it's on my resume, and it's just for fun because it was something I really loved doing. My dad,
Right.
after he finished playing in the NFL, he started broadcasting football games. He started with NBC and did NFL games for the first, I don't even remember how many years, and then he switched over to ESPN and did college football, and he did that for 24 years until he passed away. I mean, literally every year until he passed away, he was doing college football. And it just looked like so much fun to me. It looked more fun than coaching. And the reason I say that is because coaching is so stressful. I mean, there's so much work that goes into it, and people don't see all the behind the scenes work that goes into coaching and how hard it is. Broadcasting, on the other hand, was like, you get to show up for the game, you get to talk about football, and you get paid for it. And you get great seats,
Right.
what a deal. And so I used to see that and be like, man, this is like the job of all jobs. Show up to a football game, get great seats, and talk about the game, and someone pays you to do that? I was like,
Amazing.
stop. So when I was done, I did take some sideline gigs. What people don't realize, though, that was really funny at the time was that people think if you're on TV, you're making money. But the truth is, if you're not one of those network guys,
Right.
some of those guys, when you see Joe Buck and Troy, all I'm saying is that for anybody who thinks that just being on TV is going to get you paid, that's not the case. I mean, we were a fledgling network. It was the Mountain Network, and it was all about Mountain West sports, that conference in college football. And I was doing 6 or 7 games a year doing the sideline, and they were basically paying me, it wasn't a lot of money. So it was just for fun. On the weekends, I'd go do a game. Sometimes it was local. Sometimes they'd send me to New Mexico or Colorado State, and I'd do these other teams. And it was a blast, and I enjoyed it, but it definitely wasn't something that was like, paying the bills. It was more fun and a little bit of side money. But, like I said, unless you're big time, unless you're on a network, you're not making a lot of money doing it.
One of the things about that skill set of communication, though, I can see how that would transfer into a career of sales. When I first met you the very first time when we were at Santa Fe, you were new in that division, and right before I left to go to J&J, I remember you told an interesting story about you got a phone call. If they were looking for your dad to be on the radio, maybe you could take us back to that story. I think you might have answered and gone on the radio instead of your father.
Yeah. So, I mean, for your listeners that are older than like 30, they have to understand that like there were weird phones back in the day, right? Those ones that were on the wall. And so all growing up, people called for my father all the time because of who he was. And I answered the phone a lot, and you get to that age where your voice starts to change. And I don't remember, I was 15 or 16 years old, and I started answering the phone, and I'd say hello, and people would say, Todd, and people would get me mixed up with him because we sounded similar at that point. And one time, just to be funny, I said something to my dad about, what if I did one of these radio shows? Because people called them all the time from all over the country to be on their radio show, whether it was, Miami or LA or Washington. Sometimes he would have regular shows set up. Sometimes he was just asked to be a guest to talk about the latest, the latest news in the NFL or college football. And so he was asked to do that all the time. And a lot of times you don't get paid for that when people are just kind of asking for his time. And a lot of times he didn't get paid. And so he didn't mind. He was like, yeah, why don't you do it? Next time they call, you just say hello. And then when they say Todd, say, yeah, what's going on? I'm ready. So we kind of were in on this together, and it was just for fun. I don't think anybody was harmed in this, I hope. But a radio station in Chicago called, and I picked up the phone, and I said, hello. And they said, Todd, you ready? And I said, yeah, let's do this. And I said, okay, we're putting you on the air in about a minute. And so I went to that little backstage where you're listening to all what's going on the radio, and their opening scene, and I'm just ready to go. And then boom, they click and they bring me on, and I'm live on the air, and they start asking me questions about the NFL. And I love the NFL, and I kept up on it. But I definitely wasn't my dad. I'm answering questions the best I can, but I didn't know everything as well as my dad. I didn't come across as smoothly as my father either, because, at that time, I mean, he had 30 years of experience, on air doing his thing. And I'm a 15, 16-year-old trying to do a national radio show out of Chicago. So it was fun, though. It was a fun experience for me. They actually called back like 2 minutes after the show. They actually said, Todd, was that you? And my dad did answer the phone that time. And he goes, yeah, is everything okay? And he sounded more like him. And they're like, nah, something was just weird about it.
That's awesome. I love that story.
We almost got caught, but.
Well, putting yourself forward, being willing to talk, have a conversation is true to your personality. You worked a little bit in medical device. And some of my listeners is, a lot of people trying to think about their career, whether they go into pharma, medical device. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what was your career life, with Stryker, endoscopy. What did your day-to-day look in that position?
I get asked this question a lot about the difference between, devices and pharmaceuticals. And I have, up and comers asking me what I should get into. What I say to people is that if you're not sure what you want to do between the two, I would recommend, if you can get into devices, to do that first, because you can get a pharma job after device, but it's really hard to get a device job after pharma. I'm not saying impossible, but there's a stigma about pharmaceutical reps in the device world, and they don't think super highly about pharma reps. And I'd been with Novartis for 4 years, and I interviewed for this device job. And I felt like I knocked the interview out of the park. I mean, I felt like I couldn't have done better in the interview. And here's this manager, Stryker Endoscopy, and he looks at me and he says, Toby, this is one of the best interviews I've had. You've answered everything perfectly, just the way I'd want you to answer. He said, I just can't get over the fact that you're a pharma rep. He goes, I promised myself I'd never hire a pharma rep.
Wow.
So he was having this inner struggle with me, because of one thing. The main thing on my resume was that I was a pharma rep, and he had already told himself I would never hire a pharma rep, because in his mind they were lazy, they learned bad habits, and they weren't hard workers. And here I'd done a perfect interview in his mind, but he was still struggling to give me the job because I was a pharma rep and I had that label. And so it was interesting. It was really a good learning experience for me. And as I got into medical devices, I quickly learned the difference. I mean, you can't put every pharma rep in a box, and you can't put every med device rep in a box and say, this is the life and this is the life. So I apologize if it comes across that way. But in general, we do understand that most pharma rep jobs are a little easier. You have to see a certain amount of doctors a day. Most of the time we're getting up, taking care of our kids. Maybe we're going to the gym and we're getting out there at 9:30, 10, wait until the clinics are open so we can get to the clinics. We're doing a nice little lunch with the doctors. And then, a lot of times we're home in time to do carpool at 3:00. And that's a normal pharma day. And I know there are pharma reps that might be listening to this going, that's not my day. I work way harder than that. And that's fair. But I think that's pretty normal for a pharma day. And, with med devices, when I was in the OR, I was in the operating room at 7 a.m. with doctors ready to go. And this wasn't a case of, pharma, most of the time you're about 80% salary and 20% bonus commissions. You got this fat salary no matter what you do. Once you sign the paper, you're committed to that salary. The other thing about the commission and bonus structure in most companies, not every company, but in most companies, if you hit 95% of your goal, you get 95% of your bonus. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not that scary. And then if you hit 105%, they've got these multipliers, right, that get you to 120% of your bonus. So they really take care of reps. And so if you really want to be taken care of and you really want a nice, flexible, cushy job, then I would say get into pharma. If you really want to challenge yourself, and maybe you're a former athlete who misses that culture of competing every day and eating what you kill and not having a cap on what you can make, then medical device is the way to go. I mean, it was fun because I made more money in med device than I ever made in pharma, but I was also a lot more stressful. I mean, every Sunday night I was like nervous about another week. I was getting up and I was like, okay, because I didn't have a salary. I was 100% commission. What I sold, I got a percentage of, and a lot of most med device that I know of is that way. You get 10% of everything you sell, you get 5%, 6%, 12%, depending on what you negotiate, you get a percentage of everything that gets sold in your territory. And so it's up to you to increase sales. And if you increase sales, you can make whatever you want. And then with Stryker, if you hit your number by the end of the year, their bonus structure was like, we're going to give you a huge, nice bonus and take care of you. If you hit 99%, you got nothing. You didn't get 99% of the bonus. You got $0. You didn't even get a bonus.
Wow.
So it's definitely two different worlds. It's funny because people a lot of times just lump them both together in medical sales, but in a lot of ways they couldn't be more different because they are completely different cultures, different worlds. The only thing they have in common is that they have medical and their sales. So
right. You you were with Stryker for how long? How many years?
6.5.
6.5. And you've been with Sanofi now for about how many years?
I just passed my Stryker mark, so I've been with Sanofi almost 7 now.
Wow. Now, the initial process, what made you decide, okay, you're crushing it, Stryker, you're doing well. There's a little bit of a worry you mentioned on Sundays. You were like, oh my goodness. What made you decide to get back into pharma?
It was a combination of factors. There were a few things going on in the job that I didn't like. One of the big IDNs in my territory was changing the way we could sell. And it was really frustrating to me because they were this big 800-pound gorilla in my area. And all these relationships that I'd built on a local level were starting to not mean anything because they were making decisions on high. And I didn't have access to them. We had people that were supposed to be talking to them. But like I would go in an OR and I would have the OR director, the business manager, the main surgeon, and the entire staff would be on my side saying, hey, we got to get Stryker. And then all of a sudden they'd get somebody else because somebody at corporate had decided, no, we got this screaming deal that if we went across the board, we were going to get this company's deal. And I was like, wait, I literally did my job. I won with everybody that I talked to. Everybody was on my side. And then I didn't get the deal. And that was tough to take when you're talking about $500,000 deals and I'm getting 11%. And now that $55,000 check that was supposed to come my way wasn't coming my way. And it wasn't because of anything that I did wrong. It was because, like I said, it was, a corporate decision. So that was frustrating to me. And I didn't like that. And I felt like it was going that direction. And then on top of the anxiety I was feeling and the fact that my kids were getting older and they were, I was coaching more. I was being more involved in carpool, more involved in a lot of things as they were getting older. I felt like it was a good time for me just to see what was out there and see if I could find a more flexible job so that I could put my family first and not the job first. And so those were some of the factors that led to me looking into some other things and seeing what was available and then ultimately taking a job with Sanofi.
Well, then in your career with Sanofi, you've had, multiple positions there. Tell us a little bit about, just broadly speaking, the different divisions you've been in at Sanofi.
Well, really, I mean, the majority of my time I was with neurology in the multiple sclerosis division. That was my first, 5.5 years, almost 6 years, is that's what I did. And we had 2 products for multiple sclerosis, which is now a very competitive area to be in because I think there's like 27 options now for MS. And then when that division, so the main drug we had, the patent ran out, that division didn't have a backup drug yet. And so that division started to kind of, it was going away, let's say. And so we saw the writing for a while. I took a little transition job where it was, still doing the same thing, selling MS to people who were still using the branded product while there was generic. And what they did though is they'd cut, all the other reps had gone, and there was like 6 of us left in the whole country selling this drug. So I had this huge territory for like 5-6 months where it was, I had Texas, Louisiana, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah. I'm trying to remember how big my territory, but it was big.
That's
And so
huge.
I had this enormous territory for like 5 or 6 months, just trying to push our branded product while, for Medicare patients, because they were still preferring that. Anyway, this is boring stuff. After that, I realized that this wasn't going to last very long, and there was an opening in rare hematology, the rare blood disorders division, and I jumped on that, and that's where I've been since July of last year, calling on hematologists and oncologists.
Wow. How big is your territory now?
It's 3 states. It's basically Oregon, Idaho, and Utah.
Wow. Still a lot of time on the road, huh?
Yeah, it is. I've lived in the Utah area now for most of my life since I was 13, and every medical sales job I've had in the last 18 years has either been northern Utah or southern Utah,
Okay.
except for that little 6-month stint where I had this huge territory. But other than that, it was always northern Utah or southern Utah. I had one of those 2 territories, and then all of a sudden I switched over, and now I've got 3 states. So it is a little bit of an adjustment because I'm traveling more, jumping on more planes, and don't necessarily love the travel, but it hasn't been too bad.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's very interesting. Maybe you could maybe jump in a little bit. Just tell us a little bit about your life, what you're doing when you're not in medical sales.
Okay. Well, I have 4 kids. One of them just started college. She's my oldest, one girl, and then I had 3 boys after her. She's at Utah State in Logan, that's the northeast corner of Utah. And then I have 3 boys. One's a sophomore in high school, and he's on the tennis team. All 4 kids love tennis. I never thought, like, if you would have said 15 years ago I'd have a tennis family, I would have laughed about that. I said, no way. But we've got a tennis family. Everybody loves tennis. And I found myself playing a lot more tennis, and I enjoy it. And it's been fun picking it up in my older age and actually seeing improvement in my game. You don't see a lot of improvement in anything when you're 45. So,
Wow, Toby. Good.
Getting better at something. So that's been fun. And, so yeah, my son's on the high school team, and he's playing doubles for varsity, and he's in DECA, and then my 2 little guys. There's a little gap between my 2 older kids, and then my 2 little guys are 11 and 9, and they love flag football and tennis, and going to school, and they're buddies, and I help with carpooling, and my wife, I've been married 20 years, and met her in college, and I'm not sure what else you want to know about that.
No, that's great. That's good. And
what's going on.
That's outstanding. When you you have an athletic family, tennis. You didn't think tennis, but tennis family, and you've also mentioned your dad. A little bit the legacy that he left for us. He passed away. What year was it that he passed away? He passed away
2013.
2013. You've talked about his legacy, the impact that he's had on your life, not just you, but a lot of Raiders fans, a lot of people who are football fans admire your father, and he was a great. He won Super Bowls. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about your desire to see him in the NFL Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that was another thing that's been nice about switching jobs, getting a little more flexibility. My daughter's in college now, and I'm finding myself with a little bit more free time these days. And one of the things that I was spending some of my free time on was understanding how this whole Hall of Fame process works and why he's been overlooked for so long, sending out some letters, and just diving into the numbers, and finding out, like, what are they looking for a Hall of Fame candidate? What's holding my father back? I did a podcast last year called I Test for Two, and it's with 2 Hall of Fame voters that are the hosts of this podcast. And I kind of outlined my father's case for the Hall of Fame. And, there were 3 tight ends in his era that made the Hall of Fame. And when I put his numbers against them and his accolades against those guys, I do feel like he definitely holds his own, and he's better than them in a lot of different ways when you put up those accolades. And so I've just been trying to bring more awareness to it, and get somebody. I mean, the way it works, once you don't get in the first time, and I believe this is similar in the other sports, but in football, 5 years after you retire, you're eligible for the Hall of Fame, and you have a 10-year window to make the Hall of Fame as a modern era, inductee. After those 10 years, everybody gets thrown into this pile of seniors, and it's just this pile of everybody who's ever played in the NFL. And once you're in that pile, it's really hard to get in, and that's where my father is now. And every year they pick like one, two, maybe even three people out of that pile. But in order to be picked from that pile, you usually have to have somebody in the committee who comes to the meeting wanting to push for that guy. So I'm trying to find one of these 15 senior committee guys who really wants to go to bat for my dad, because it doesn't matter how much I say, if nobody's showing up at this meeting with him on their mind, he's not going to get in. And so it's just trying to get somebody who's like, I'll carry the flag. Let me go in there. And everything you've outlined is great. I think he deserves it. I'm going to fight for him, and then have everybody agree like, hey, it's his time to get in. But unfortunately, now that it's past his time, it's really hard. And so, I'm just doing what I can. When I have some time, I'll send an email here or there. I've done all the research. I do feel like he's got a very, very strong case. I do see some of the points against him. He played 11 years, but was only really had a 6-year stretch where he was outstanding. And that's not a long stretch of being outstanding. Like it's hard to argue that there was anybody better during that 6-year stretch, but it's only a 6-year stretch, And so sometimes they say, well, the longevity, I mean, most of these guys that are getting in had a 10-year stretch or a 12-year stretch. And, he was great, no doubt about it, but 6 years, is that enough? And so that's kind of been what I've been fighting as I have these discussions with people. So, but I hope he gets in. I think he deserves it. And I know before he passed away, like, that was one of the things that really meant something to him. He's been inducted into the Oregon Hall of Fame, the California Hall of Fame, the Utah Hall of Fame, the BYU Hall of Fame, the Nike Hall of Fame. I think he's in like the Blue Gray Hall of Fame. That's a college football. Like, he's been in a lot of Hall of Fames. And he said to me, he goes, this is all great, but I'm still not in the one that I really want to be in. And that's what he said to me one time. And I'll never forget it, because he didn't open up a lot. He was a big, strong, old school guy that didn't open up. So just hearing him say that, it's got me thinking I would love to help him get there, even posthumously. It would be nice to have him get that.
Well, we're right there with you, Toby. We're hoping your father, Todd Christensen, is inducted to the NFL Hall of Fame. Toby, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. I think you've given a lot of good insights from your story, but also your story, some of the differences in both medical device and pharma that will give people who are thinking about one of these industries, some food for thought. And I think it's very helpful. So thank you again for coming on the podcast. One last question, personal growth. Have you read any books or listened to anything in your podcast or anything that's helped you that kind of stands out that you would recommend as a good resource, maybe on leadership or life?
On leadership and life, I mean, I read a lot of books, and I think, honestly, I get something from every book. Like, I really love David Goggins and his books. I mean, he's been awesome, and I love, there's so many different kinds of books. So I apologize. I mean, as far as leadership goes, there's Justin Sua has a great podcast that I like. So does Satema Nali. Those are some podcasts that I like about leadership and motivation and get me going. And David Goggins' books are books that I really like. But honestly, man, I read so much. Like, it's a goal of mine every year to either listen to audiobook or read 100 books a year. And I get something out of every one. So, if you're out there just
100 a year.
100 a year is my goal. Yeah. And if you're out there being in medical sales is great because you're driving all the time. I've got this long territory. So that's why I would say of the 100 books, usually 70 to 75 of them are audio books. I mean, it would definitely be harder to actually read, but with all the airport time and the windshield time driving, instead of putting on music or instead of putting on, sports talk radio, I'm putting on audio books and absorbing as much knowledge as I can. Cause I feel like, you can never be too smart in a subject. You can always grow. And so anything you're getting, even if it's fiction, just to entertain yourself once in a while, to throw on, a Mitch Rapp book. I don't know if you know that series. That's one of my favorite series, the Mitch Rapp series. Anything like that, I think will help you grow and just advance as a human being.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I've not listened to any Mitch Rapp books. Well, how do you spell his last name?
Well, so that's Vince Flynn, and that's just one of my favorite fictional series. It's I was just saying, there's a lot of self-help books, there's a lot of leadership books, there's a lot of sales books, there's a lot of business books.
But it's good to get some fiction in there too.
I love
creativity.
I fly through it. Like I just started the Lincoln Lawyer series as well, and like I fly through those books a lot faster than I do, one of those other self-help books on, how to meditate or how to, whatever it is. Like those books, sometimes I have to push through, whereas you get one of those good fiction books and you fly through it. So it's fun to mix it up a little bit.
I'm the same way. Sometimes I listen, like, what's his name, Harlan Coben, and some of these books, and just, the time just passes and you're like, whoa, especially when you're driving on the road. Toby, thank you. It's been great having you on the show, and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It's nice of you.